libos anthantos, serati, nosferatus kita, cur eni, nictu.
If you like an occasional walk down video game nostalgia lane, like me, then the PlayStation era from the late 1990s to the early 2000s should hold a special place in your heart. There were plenty of high-quality games played during the time, and the PS1 was also home to some of the finest horror and action-based games. One thing that was common in some of the best games of the era was the abundance of violence and gore, and the PS1 era got away with a lot that wouldn't have been missed by the censors in today's times. In this video, I have put together a collection of some of the most disturbingly violent PS1 games that made our childhood special with loads of cheap thrills. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Thrill Kill, 1998. This canceled fighting video game is criminally underrated, but those who know about this will remember how morbidly disturbing the gameplay was. The plot involved 10 people who were all sent to hell after dying on Earth. They were then forced by the goddess of secrets, Maruka, to fight to the death for a chance at reincarnation. The game was marketed as the first 4-player 3D fighting game, and each player was given a kill meter that increased with every successful attack, and it was one of the first ever adults-only ratings from the Entertainment Software Rating Board for its violent and sexual content. The game was created by Paradox Development, and it was a game that created a lot of hype back in the day because of its groundbreaking feature that allowed 4 players to face off at once in a fight to the death. Yes, the similarity to Mortal Kombat is obvious, but the sheer entertainment in these fights is unparalleled. There were several gory ways to finish off the opponents, and there have been reports that the game was canceled because of the extreme amount of violence. Also, there were some glaring shortcomings in the game as well. The skill level required was below par when you consider some other prominent fighting games, and I only enjoyed Thrill Kill in short bursts before it became slightly boring. All in all, Thrill Kill might not have been the finest fighting game around, but it certainly was among the most violent, and I will always remember it as the first bootleg game that I ever played. Carmageddon, 1997. This vehicular combat game was one of its kind back in the day, and it was produced by Stainless Games and published by Interplay Productions. Over the years, it spawned an entire series. Such was the popularity of this PS1 hit. The gameplay involved the player racing a vehicle against many other competitors across various settings. You could be racing through the cities, industrial areas, and mines, and you had a time limit to complete each race. The real catch, however, was the race mechanics, where you could damage the cars of the competitors and run over pedestrians. The game even featured a format where you had to kill every single pedestrian on the level. The game became a controversial hit, and in many countries, the first release was censored. These censored versions replaced the human pedestrians with zombies with green blood or robots with black oil. Yes, the gameplay did require you to sweep your morals under the rug and shamelessly go on with the auto-homicide on a grand scale. The intensity was unquestionable, even though the graphic violence and gore could be off-putting for some. As for the graphics, it was mediocre at best, and even the controls were somewhat sluggish. But those who enjoyed the game during the late 90s couldn't care less because such concepts were still rare to come by. I even recommend trying out the reboot of the series called Carmageddon: Reincarnation that was released in 2015.
Never has make you dead.
Bofreaks, 1998. Bofreaks was a 3D fighting game originally planned for arcades, but eventually, the arcade release was canceled and it was released for the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. The narrative was premised in the near future, where technology and bioengineering had advanced significantly, but such advancements also led to conflicts and espionage between giant corporations called GI Corps. It caused the techno-industrial civil wars that tore the country apart and the economy collapsed. In order to reunite the country, the Secret Games Commission was formed and it organized a fighting tournament to settle the disputes between the corporations. The New Age sci-fi concept was so innovative that we were absolutely floored by the storyline. The fighting offered a diverse range from close and long-range attacks, and it took place in 3D fighting arenas. The game mechanics was not perfect or smooth, but it was a lot of fun, even though it felt weird at times. I quite enjoyed the dismemberments that you could do at any time, and it was easily one of the best-looking fighting games that you could come across. Yes, it did not match up to the legacy of Tekken and Virtua Fighter, but Bofreaks could be right up your alley if you didn't mind all the bloody fun. Evil Dead: Hail to the King, 2000. Evil Dead: Hail to the King was the second video game that was released based on the Evil Dead film franchise, and it also marked the first for the video game developer Heavy Iron Studios. The survival horror game functioned much like a Resident Evil game, and the story took place 8 years after the events of Army of Darkness. Ash Williams regained his job at S-Mart and began a new relationship with fellow employee Jenny when he started to suffer from recurring nightmares about the Necronomicon and the Deadites. Jenny took him to Professor Nobi's old cabin for answers, but it soon descended into a real-life nightmare as the evil forces played their games on Ash and his partner. I might have put this in this video simply for all the graphic violence and entertainment on offer, but Evil Dead: Hail to the King was not a perfect game by any means. There were a lot of things that did not go in favor of this game. With decent skills, one could be done with the entire game in a matter of hours, and the controls were frustratingly bad. Also, the gameplay design wasn't something to write about, and the visuals were quite average. The pre-rendered backgrounds looked crude, and the pixelization was readily apparent in each scene. The camera angles did not help, and I wish the developers spent more time with this one, because the story and concept had a lot more potential. It was probably a victim of a horrible movie to video game adaptation, and the only redeeming quality here was the violence and non-stop action. Loaded, 1995. Loaded had its origins in DC Comics and Vertigo Comics, and there was even a small graphic novel based on this sci-fi themed top-down shooter game developed by Gremlin Interactive. The game provided 6 playable characters that were a combination of villains, anti-heroes, psychopaths, perverts, murderers, and mutants. However, this unlikely group was the best hope to stop the mighty intergalactic villain FUB and save the universe. He used to be a catering officer with the Sector Marines, and he always had a twisted mind. Once, when he faced a lack of food, he cooked his own legs and served them up. When he was discharged for this lunacy, he gave himself hydraulic-powered replacements, and now that he was determined on world domination, the team of psychotic criminals was the hope for humanity. Loaded featured levels across 15 different worlds, and one could select 2 characters in cooperative mode to complete the game. The response was quite overwhelming, and many were quick to compare this game with the popular Smash TV. The multiplayer mode was particularly entertaining, and it took a simple premise to absurd heights, which is the favorite trope of all gamers. It did lack the level of strategy that you can find in Doom, but the action was relentless. Even the graphics were impressive with great detailing, and I also appreciated the light sourcing effects. With so many positives, the game became a massive commercial success, and there was over 140,000 copies sold in the US PlayStation version alone.
Fatality.
Mortal Kombat 4, 1997. The game narrative starts off thousands of years before the setting of the first game. Shinnok, one of the Elder Gods, tried to conquer all the 6 realms in the Mortal Kombat universe, but he was fought and defeated by Raiden, the God of Thunder. Shinnok was sent to Netherrealm, where he would be trapped forever, but he managed to escape with the help of the evil sorcerer Quan Chi. He now wants revenge against the Elder Gods who banished him, and he conquers the realm of Edenia with the help of a traitor. Meanwhile, Raiden requests help from the Earthrealm warriors who had saved the realms from Emperor Shao Kahn in the previous titles. This is the 4th main installment in the Mortal Kombat series developed by Midway Games, and after its arcade release, it was ported to the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. The gameplay is somewhat similar to the earlier games, but it adds some variety in the use of weapons and objects during fights. There are 17 playable characters who take part in the battle between good and evil, and this game was one of the first 3D fighting games developed by Midway Games. The violence, something you will find in the other standard fighting games of the time, but the brutality is not for everyone to handle. The sharp graphics, along with the pleasing blend of old characters and strong newcomers, make this a must-try for the fans of the franchise. Overall, Mortal Kombat 4 is definitely among the fast-moving, dark, and disturbing fighter games from the PS1 era that deserves to be revisited even today. Resident Evil 2, 1998. Capcom and the video game industry was a love affair that grew steadily during the 90s, and this PS1 classic was another of their great work. As a player takes control of the rookie cop, Leon S. Kennedy, and a college student named Claire Redfield, who have to escape Raccoon City after the citizens transform into zombies because of a biological weapon. The menace of the G-Virus continues throughout the gameplay as more mysteries are revealed about the sinister pharmaceutical company, Umbrella. The events take place 2 months after the events of the original Resident Evil, and the innovative gameplay includes elements of puzzles, combat, and exploration. What I like the most about this sequel is how each player character has unique storylines and obstacles along their way. The atmospheric setting was remarkable, and the graphics supported the high-end vision of the makes. Most of the fans agree that the game was an improvement over the original, even though there were some critics who pointed out the flaws in the controls and voice acting. The game sold like hot cakes, with over 6 million copies sold across all platforms, making this the best-selling Resident Evil game. The spooky, horror-filled world that the game created could rival some of the modern hits, and it was almost a film-like presentation that caught the fancy of the players. The sound and music was spot-on perfect, and even the general soundtrack was perfectly composed. If you haven't played Resident Evil 2, you have missed out on one of the greatest gaming experiences of the generation. Nightmare Creatures 2, 2000. Nightmare Creatures by Callisto Entertainment turned out to be quite a revelation, and the sequel soon followed within a few years. Nightmare Creatures 2 was also a survival horror game, and it was published by Konami for the PlayStation. The timeline is exactly a century after the previous game, and the occultist and antagonist from the original game, Adam Crowley, is now planning to wipe out a group of monster hunters using his race of mutant creatures. A patient named Herbert Wallace escapes from Crowley's genetics hospital, and he soon finds himself facing against the conspiracies and evil plans of Crowley as he pursues the mastermind. You play as Herbert, who is the only playable character, and the gameplay is very similar to the previous installment. The game clearly earns its mature rating because there is plenty of blood and severed body parts on offer. While the limitless violence might not be suitable for everyone, the PlayStation horror fans will find it a terrific and sharp-looking action-adventure game. The visuals are very impressive, but some have complained about the futility of the long gameplay. I personally believe that the creepy sequel is actually bloodier than the original and way more gruesome, which should please the gorehounds. Yes, it is all about the brainless fun, but sometimes we don't really mind that, do we? If you want to enjoy a simple gameplay with a wild, bloody romp and some comical bits, this is the perfect hack and slash that I can think of. Dino Crisis 1999. Every video game enthusiast knows about the legacy of the Dino Crisis franchise, and this was the first installment of this famed series. The game was developed by the same team that was behind Capcom's Resident Evil series, and even director Shinji Mikami was a part of the lot. The story of the game is premised around a special operations agent, Regina, who is set with a team to investigate a secluded island research facility. She finds out that the place has been overrun with dinosaurs, and she begins a fight for survival against the dinosaurs in order to escape alive with her team. Dino Crisis was both a critical and a commercial success, and there were several reasons behind its popularity. Firstly, the game used an original real-time engine with 3D environments instead of the pre-rendered backgrounds of the Resident Evil games. Secondly, the survival horror mechanics were quite unique, and one could indulge in a lot of action and puzzles. The visceral terror of the narrative was remarkable, and the dinosaurs featured in the game were quick, intelligent, and violent. In fact, Capcom even marketed this game as panic horror instead of survival horror. It is believed that Shinji Mikami had even bigger plans for the game, and his vision was not completely fulfilled, but the game still surpassed all expectations. Everything about the game, from its intensity to its graphics and engaging gameplay, ensured that there would be sequels to follow. And even today, this is regarded as one of Capcom's finest hours in the horror game genre. Jurassic Park Warpath, 1999. This was a pretty nice spin-off of the films Jurassic Park and The Lost World, and the fighting game was developed by Black Ops Entertainment and co-published by Electronic Arts and DreamWorks Interactive. The player has to choose a dinosaur in order to fight with the other dinosaurs, and it starts off with 8 dinosaurs, while 6 others can be unlocked in arcade mode. Each one of the dinosaurs has its own fighting techniques and pros and cons. The game offers various arenas that will remind you of the first 2 films, and there are multiple modes available to try out your skills. The dinosaur fanboys will have a gala time with this one because of the wide variety of dinosaurs on offer. The first 8 dinosaurs available from the beginning include the likes of Tyrannosaurus Rex, Megaraptor, and Styracosaurus, among others. While the game is quite engaging and entertaining, it was unfairly compared to Primal Rage by many critics, and it often came up short. I enjoyed the interactive level designs, and the resemblance of the locations from the movies is a good reference for the fans. The animation is also nicely done, and the dinosaur designs stand out. Yes, the size disparity points out that not everything is accurate, but how perfect do you expect a game from the late 90s to be? The gameplay can be sluggish at times, but if you keep the minor glitches aside, it can be a solid dinosaur game to try out. Alien Trilogy, 1996. This first-person shooter developed by Probe Entertainment and published by Acclaim Entertainment was a great take on the first 3 movies in the Alien franchise. The player takes the role of Lieutenant Ellen Ripley, and the story is told through text-based mission briefings that guide the player through the narrative. It begins in the same manner as Aliens, and Ripley travels to LV-426 to restore contact with the colony there. When the other Marines are wiped out, Ripley must travel across the infested colony and move through the crashed alien ship to destroy the deadly creatures and escape. The fans of the Alien movies will notice the recreation of the film's atmosphere, and the gameplay depth compared to the other first-person shooters is also appreciable. The game was one of the first to use the 3D motion capture technology, and the movement of the aliens was created using this technology. The sound effects were often borrowed from the films, and many were quick to term this the best video game based on the Alien franchise. There were some minor targeting problems in the gameplay, but nothing to put you off. The detailing was extraordinary, and it made the experience so immersive that people got hooked onto the game. Looking back, the game might not have been anything revolutionary, but it was still one of the best-selling PS1 games, and certainly worth the time. Final Doom, 1996. Final Doom is a 1996 first-person shooter comprised of two separate story campaigns, TNT, Evolution, and the Plutonia Experiment. In TNT, Evolution, the Union Aerospace Corporation establishes a base on one of Jupiter's moons, only to have it overrun by demons arriving from a spaceship. The lone Marine survivor returns to the devastated base to avenge his fallen comrades by fighting through hordes of hellspawn. In the Plutonia Experiment, after prior invasions, Earth's top scientists attempt to seal the remaining gateways to Hell, leaving one portal that must be closed, and here, the player's Marine infiltrates a demon-infested complex to defeat the gatekeeper and prevent another full-scale invasion of Earth. This game extends the classic Doom formula with two large campaigns, TNT, Evolution, and the Plutonia Experiment, offering 64 challenging new levels but without adding new monsters or weapons. The game is praised for its intense difficulty, especially in the Plutonia Experiment, and for creative, sometimes punishing level design. However, it faces criticism for lacking innovation and relying entirely on existing Doom assets, leading some reviewers to suggest it mainly appeals to hardcore Doom fans rather than general players. Many find the gameplay as satisfying as ever, and the sheer amount of content is notable. Yes, the game engine did become outdated in the years since the first release of Doom, but we still remember this as one of the bright moments in video game history.
I trusted you to cover the angles, yeah? You'll enjoy your last breath, Glass, because your eternity is about to start, and it's gonna be horrifying.
Fear Effect 2000. The game was developed by Kronos Digital Entertainment, and it came with a pretty unique storyline based in the year 2050. The player has to control 3 mercenaries in Hong Kong, and the game has both elements of survival horror and stealth. The daughter of a powerful triad boss has disappeared, and the mercenaries have to look for her in the city. However, they are not a rescue team, and they intend to kidnap the girl before her father's men can locate her. There are plenty of twists along the way, and the gameplay offers enough thrills to keep you hooked on the whole time. I have been a big fan of the cinematic presentation of this game, and the unique visuals are so very impressive, especially if you consider that the game was made over 2 decades ago. I haven't often come across games with such tight scripts, and the distinctive graphics made it even more lucrative among the other options available. There is, however, one slight issue, which is that the boss fights are far too difficult, and the clumsy control system doesn't make it any easier. Aside from that, you will enjoy the extreme violence that is definitely not for the squeamish, and the gameplay is full of action, puzzles, and characters that you will start to root for. The game won several awards, and even today, it stands out as one of the best in its genre. Tenshu, Stealth Assassin, 1998. The game allows you to assume the role of a ninja, and it had me there. So, pardon my biasness here. This action-adventure stealth game was developed by From Software, and it went on to spawn an entire franchise. The story is set in the turbulent Sengoku period of Japan, and it follows the missions undertaken by the ninja Rikimaru and the Kunoichi Ayame of the Azuma ninja clan. During their missions, they come across the dark ninja Onekage, who is the mastermind behind most things that go wrong in the story. I particularly love the cinematic ending, where Rikimaru sacrifices himself and Onekage is defeated and revived. It was one of the highest-selling games of the time and sold over 1.4 million copies worldwide. Much of the success was because of the fresh take on ninja gaming that it offered, and the gameplay dared to venture beyond the stereotypes. You will be left with an adrenaline rush courtesy of the nerve-wracking narrative, and there will be moments of frustration that you will learn to endure. The game is built around stealth, and even though the graphics from the time hasn't aged well, I still don't mind trying it out even today. This is the sort of game that the long gaming nights are made of, and the game mechanics are largely free from silly bugs and interruptions. Steel Harbinger, 1996. I don't know about too many random shooter games that come with such a gripping storyline as this one. Steel Harbinger's story is set in the year 2069, during a brutal war in North America, where Canada and Mexico are fighting the United States, when suddenly alien pods rain down from space onto the continent. These pods release metallic tentacles that convert humans and animals into biomechanical monsters bent on eradicating humanity. Miranda Bowen, the daughter of a scientist studying the alien pods, is attacked and infected by one, transforming her into a half-human, half-alien biomechanical hybrid known as the Steel Harbinger. Unlike others who are fully converted, she retains her mind and becomes humanity's last hope. Armed with various futuristic weapons and her unique biology, Miranda must fight through ravaged cities, and her goal is to destroy the alien invaders, rescue survivors, and ultimately activate a military satellite designed to protect Earth from further alien pod attacks. The simple playability of this game is what sets it apart, and the controls are simple and easy to master. This top-down 3D game comes with unique level designs that are fun, even when they are repetitive. The graphics are remarkable, and the Harbinger looks quite dandy in her biomechanical bikini. The monsters and aliens look great as well, and I just wish that the game came with a better save game feature. Overall, it is not just a great game to look at, but also a great game to play that made many childhoods special. Cardinal Sin, 1998. If fighting games are your cup of tea, then Cardinal Sin is probably a video game that you are familiar with. Developed by the famous Kronos Digital Entertainment, the game could rival some of the best in business. The story is set in a dark medieval fantasy world, where generations-long wars between the clans of the Bloodlands are temporarily ended by a mysterious figure called the Wanderer, who brings them peace with his book of knowledge. However, when the Wanderer disappears after dividing the book into scrolls given to each clan, the clans resume their fierce fighting for the scrolls. Amidst this chaos, a powerful sorceress named Sin appears, transforms the scrolls into 3 enchanted swords, and declares a tournament where each clan's greatest warrior battles to the death for control over the entire Bloodlands and the secrets of the swords. The stakes are high as the wars continue, and a new tournament begins, promising ruthless combat for ultimate power. Kronos Digital Entertainment previously worked with the 3D fighter game Criticom, and Cardinal Sin is definitely an improvement. The only problem was that the developers got a little too ambitious here, and they threw every used fighting game cliché in the mix. It would have been better if the 3D arenas were interactive and there was more variety, but I think that the fast 3D engine made up for these issues. The audio soundtrack was just appropriate, and while the controls were convoluted, it was still a commendable effort that was visually amazing, and the playability was addictive enough. Overblood, 1997. This sci-fi video game was developed by River Hill Soft, and it was published by EA for the PlayStation. The game narrative is premised at Lystra Laboratories that has a hidden research center. Here, a team of scientists have conducted some controversial genetic experiments. The player character is Raz Karsi, and a system malfunction releases the character from a cryogenic container. He wakes up with no memory and tries to escape, but with time, the sinister plans of the scientists and the nature of his true identity are revealed. Many regard this as the first survival horror game that makes use of a fully three-dimensional virtual environment. The gameplay is part adventure and part survival horror, where you will find certain arcade and fighting game elements. You can switch from first and third-person camera angles, and there are various puzzles to be solved along the way. The game is often criticized for being a bit too slow-paced, and I cannot deny that it does take away some of the fun because there is very little tension. The action sequences are too simplistic as well, and while the graphics are decent, the appearance of the characters could have been improved. Overall, this is not a flawless game by any means, but it surely is one that can hold your attention for a few hours. Forsaken, 1998. I have enjoyed this first-person shooter for hours, so pardon my biasness, that is only natural for this game developed by Probe Entertainment. It is a 3D first-person shooter that features loads of weapons and interesting missions. The story is set in a futuristic world, and all of life on Earth has been destroyed because of a shockwave from a science experiment gone wrong. The player has to act as someone who tries to obtain the planet's lost treasure, and the Nintendo 64 version requires you to kill the looters finding the treasure. There are similarities between this game and games like Descent and Quake, and the initial difficulty level of this game was so extreme that Acclaim had to decrease the difficulty later. The game comes with 22 missions, and all of them require you to destroy enemy ships through a maze of tunnels. The use of the 3D Axeliator has ensured top-quality graphics, and the attention to detail is stunning. I love the generous use of real-time colored lighting effects, and the heated battles look really cool. The game comes with excellent control, and the 4-player split-screen capability is also very impressive. If you keep the extreme difficulty aside, it is a game that can compete with some of the big names in the gaming industry. The Lost World, Jurassic Park, 1997. The popularity of Jurassic Park during the 90s was something else, and The Lost World was so successful that a gaming adaptation was only a matter of time. This action-adventure game was developed by DreamWorks Interactive, and the story featured 5 characters across the game, each of whom had their own special abilities. The task was to complete all levels sequentially in order to gain access to the next character. The game story did ignore the plot of the film, but it did bring in some of its dinosaurs. Also, the basic theme remained the same, where it was complete chaos on the island. The violence in this game was something else, and what made these scenes stand out were the enthralling sound effects. The narrative was atmospheric enough, and it was effective as the dinosaurs rolled out. If only the game had better controls, it could have rivaled some of the very popular dinosaur games out there. This was rather unfortunate because the game had almost everything else going in its favor. Some even complained about the amateurish level designs, but you would still be rewarded with a fun and realistic gameplay that could keep you engaged. Silent Hill, 1999. This survival horror game needs no introduction for anybody with a taste for horror games, and developed by Team Silent, it broke all records with insane sales. It spawned a massive franchise as well. After a car crash, he woke up to find that Cheryl was missing, and slowly, he explored the deserted and foggy town of Silent Hill. The dark mysteries of the town and his haunting reality would be revealed through the gameplay, and I don't think many video games have scared me as much as this one. The game used a third-person view with real-time rendering of 3D environments, and this meant that the visuals felt so real that it was unnerving for the player. There are 5 different endings in the game, and you could make a movie out of every single one. The disturbing atmosphere in the game was something else, and the violent bits only added to the gaming experience. The voice acting could have been better, but that was hardly our concern back then. It is a game that is still worth playing today, so you can imagine how awesome and ahead of its time the game was when it was released. Marvelous verdict. PS1. Era ruled with some obnoxious violence. Those were the days. Nobody really cared about what was deemed appropriate, and the PS1 era blessed us with some absolutely crazy games that did not hold back. All the titles in the video have some disturbing elements in the gameplay, and yet, nobody seemed to care, and we all enjoyed the bloody mayhem to cut out the stress. Over the next decade, the video games acquired a lot more finesse and polished looks, but the charm of these old-school titles and often crude gameplay disappeared under the sands of time. It is still fun to look back or even try out some of these classic titles, and do let me know in the comments below if you still play any of these games. I would also love to know of some other video games from the era that fit the bill, and feel free to write about them in the comments. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.